Okay, I'm just kind of winging this response to you. Sorry for if I seem a little blank. One of the things that has happened since the transplant, I've got graft versus host of the eyes, so my immune system's kind of attacking my eyes. They water a bit, and my tears aren't really normal. So anyway, my eyes can look a little funny, and I can look a little distant, but I'm not distant. I'm feeling fine. Just as a response uh, to the things that were in your video, this is directed to Richard Winkel. Basically, a lot of your response, I feel like, doesn't apply so much to what I was trying to say in the video. A lot of it I would consider outside the scope of my subject of apostolic authority in the early church, which I was applying mostly to the subject of the faith, of the gospel being handed down. From an Eastern Orthodox perspective, that would be the Nicene Creed, and the things that surround it, things that are essential to the faith, not things that are, one church may do this, another church may do this, but the things that the apostles talked about that were central to the faith. And I think over the centuries that those apostolic churches that were founded by the apostles have changed some of those things. You would acknowledge that in the Roman Catholic Church. I doubt you would acknowledge that in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but to me, the role that, say, icons have gotten in the Eastern Orthodox churches, to me, is a deviation from what the apostles taught. And I know that you would say, because you brought up the liturgy, I know that you would say, there's a liturgy of St. James, and the liturgy goes all the way back to the time of the New Testament, and I know that there's at least one icon that Eastern Orthodox people say came from Luke. I don't believe any of that. There's no testimony to that in the 2nd or 3rd century churches. Let me give you a description of a church service that was given by Justin in the middle of the 2nd century. It's from his first apology. It's chapter 67. And it says, hang on, let me get to the right spot. And on the day called Sunday, all who live in the cities or in the country gather together to one place, and the memoirs of the apostles or the writings of the prophets are read, as long as time permits. Then, when the reader has ceased, the president verbally instructs and exhorts to the imitation of these good things. Then we all rise together and pray, and as we before said, when our prayer is ended, bread and wine and water are brought, and the president in like manner offers prayers and thanksgivings according to his ability. And the people assent, saying Amen. And there is a distribution to each, and a participation of that over which thanks have been given. And to those who are absent, a portion is sent by the deacons. And they who are well-to-do and willing give what each thinks fit. And then he goes on to describe what it is that they do with the money that's given. I guess you may not realize I'm not Protestant as far as holding to Protestant doctrines. I don't believe really, except in grace only, in any of the solas of the Reformation. I don't believe sola scriptura. I don't believe sola fide. The salvation by faith alone is taught by fundamentalist Protestants today is just false, and it's strictly denied by the Scriptures. The Scriptures say that the church is the pillar and the support of the truth. I don't even like the idea of a closed canon. I don't think the canon has never been officially closed, except by the Roman Catholic Church in the mid-1500s at the Council of Trent. There's a lot of talk about how the Council of Hippo in 393 got together and they decreed a certain canon, a list of books that everybody was supposed to hold to. But that was in 393. Augustine was the bishop of Hippo, and he wrote a book called On Christian Doctrine, and in it he talked about books that some churches accept, books that other churches accept, and that was more like AD 412, almost 20 years after that, and the bishop of Hippo didn't know that the Synod of Hippo had decreed what every church ought to hold to as far as what should be in their Bible. So I'm not at all opposed to different churches having a different set of books that are their scriptures. That was true really all the way up until Jerome translated the Latin Vulgate, and that became so popular in the West that it became the standard for what was the canon. It was never decreed. The Catholic Church never decreed it. You can read all this in the Catholic Encyclopedia. Our 66 books of the Protestant Church, our 73 books of the Roman Catholic Church, that was never decreed by anyone, anywhere. There is no council that established those things, like I said, until the Council of Trent, which was a response to the Reformation. And again, you can read all that in the Catholic Encyclopedia. Anyway, my point is to go, a lot of the things that you're talking about aren't really pertinent to the video that I was making on Apostolic Authority. The point I'm trying to make is when it comes down to something the apostles taught, nobody's allowed to change it, not the modern church. And one of the main reasons I bring it up is because, and this is a situation where I'd agree with the Eastern Orthodox churches. However, everyone in the West, Protestants and Roman Catholics alike, basically believe that the church grew to a fuller and better understanding of the Trinity over time. And so, if I go to give somebody a description of the Trinity from the early Christian writings, and there's some very thorough descriptions in Theophilus's letters, his books to Autolycus, in Tertullian's Against Praxeus, there's a lot of relatively thorough discussions of the Trinity that say things that are somewhat different from what is said by the Roman Catholics and by the Protestants. And so much I hear in the West, basically we grew to a fuller understanding. Those people didn't really understand the Trinity yet. And that's the place where I'm going, no, we don't improve upon the apostles. The apostles taught something about the Trinity, and the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestants, by default, having inherited it from the Roman Catholic Church, basically have produced a slightly different doctrine that they consider an improvement. They consider it an act of development by the church over time, an act of revelation. I consider it error. And that's really kind of the point in my video. And I feel like I gave plenty of witness that you just don't mess with what the apostles taught. You don't change it. Now, if you come along and go, well, yeah, but they taught liturgy, and here's the liturgy, and it got handed down here, and it got handed down there. Well, if that's true, I don't have any problems with that. And as far as you brought up the Eucharist, I think everybody just assumes that if I say something that's different than, say, the Roman Catholic or the Eastern Orthodox says, that therefore I oppose everything that the Baptists oppose. But that's not true. I'm all for the Eucharist being the center of the gathering of the church. I think that's great. If there's things that we can learn from the Greek Orthodox Church and the Patriarch who descended from the Bishop of Antioch, that's a testimony to what the apostles taught and what the apostles handed down to the church, I think that's great. I don't agree with the whole widespread thing of going, I have to say I'm Greek Orthodox and be attached to this bishop from Antioch. I believe the early churches were independent. I don't believe they were totally independent. I believe they were subject to the apostles, and so they cared about the apostolic churches. They wanted to know what was taught. I feel like I have exactly the same heart in that matter. I can't just run over to Ephesus or run over to Rome and go, oh, whatever they say, they probably remember what the apostles taught. No, they probably don't. It's been 2,000 years since Christ died. They probably don't remember what the apostles taught. So things have to be done differently. We have to do some examination. We have to check things out. You do the same thing, Richard, because you reject a lot of the things that the Roman Catholics teach. So you're examining and checking things out, not just taking their word for it. And I want to examine and check out the things that the Bishop of Constantinople, that the Bishop of Antioch, that the Bishop of Moscow, that the Bishop of Alexandria says. I want to take a look at the fact that they excommunicated the Bishop of Alexandria and they excommunicated Nestorius and others in the 5th century. I want to look at all that because all of that affects a claim to apostolic succession, and studying that lets us find out whether there's really been apostolic truth that's been transmitted down to our age, or whether we're just looking at things that people had to figure out on their own anyway. Um, I believe the churches ought to lean into one another, but the fact is, what God is offering to people is to call them out of their solitary life and into His family. And coming out of solitary life and into the family of God means coming into a local church where you have brothers and sisters around you. And one of the apostolic traditions that we have lost is scriptural teaching and apostolic teaching is that you should get the leaven out of the church. You should put the wicked out from among you. But both the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox churches have had, and the Protestant churches at their start, have had a long history of the church includes all the citizens in a given town. And it doesn't matter whether they believe in God, whether they live like they believe in God. All of that doesn't matter. It's just everybody. They're required to go to church. And you do not see the kind of holiness that you saw in the second century church because everybody's a Christian. And that's been true ever since the 4th century. That was probably the biggest and the worst deviation from apostolic teaching that there's ever been. And you can see the difference in the life of the church between the 2nd and 3rd century and the mid-4th century. You had peace-loving people who refused to take up a sword, refused to participate in the military, and then 200 years later, in the middle of the 4th century, they took up arms against each other and beat one another to death in the churchyards. Those things happened because all of a sudden everybody was a Christian. And people who wanted to actually live like the Christians lived in the 2nd and 3rd century ended up having to go live in the desert and be a hermit, or live in a monastery and be a monk. In a sense, to go off and get alone, they were going off and getting away from what was passing for the church, which was completely false and still is. The other day, somebody showed me the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Not recommending that movie or anything else. Somebody showed it to me. I saw it. And it really illustrates my objection to the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. And that is, there's all these people who do whatever they want, live however they want, and they don't even, there's not even a consideration of, there's a standard that Christ set that you should deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Him. They think that's for monks. Well, in a sense, it is for monks because the monks were the church of the 4th century. The church had to flee the huge public gatherings that passed for a church in the 4th century. So those are the kind of things I object to. I know I was raised Roman Catholic. I was not raised Protestant. I never attended a Protestant church until I was 21. So I've got both backgrounds. I have no Eastern Orthodox background, but I have met a few people who are Eastern Orthodox, and I've even been to a Syrian Orthodox Church of the East in Sacramento, but they're like a Protestant charismatic church with rituals. You know, they have some traditions from the Syrian Orthodox Church of the East, but basically they're like a Protestant charismatic church. They don't include just everybody. But the Roman Catholic churches that I was in, the whole time I was growing up, I never met one person that diligently followed Christ. Not one. And I attended Catholic churches in Taiwan, Germany, North Dakota, Kansas. I could list some others, but I can't even think of them at the moment. But in all those places, I never met one person that was diligently following Christ that had any thought of even trying to deny themselves, take up their cross daily, follow Him, be a living example all the time of the Holy Spirit living inside of them. Now I can sound really negative in saying all this, but the fact is, that was my experience. And the Roman Catholic Church was doing nothing about it. My experience with a few Eastern Orthodox people and with what I saw in the Big Fat Greek Wedding was just like the Roman Catholics, and it shouldn't surprise me because that was in the 4th century already. It was in Constantinople that two churches got together and fought over Constantine's body and beat each other to death in the churchyard. It says until the blood and the gore filled the well and ran into the street. That's the historian's description of what happened then. And that's from just letting everybody's a Christian all of a sudden. We don't purge the church like 1 Corinthians 5 says. We don't put out that wicked from among us. We don't search for the church to be an unleavened loaf that's holy. But that's what God offers to us. That's the gospel. The gospel is that you would be able to come into the church, be led into holiness, be one with people, be an example of unity and the love of the Spirit to everybody around, that it would be a collection of Spirit-filled believers who are zealous for God, denying themselves, exhorting one another to the imitation of the holy things that are written in Scripture. That's my picture. My picture is not opposition to the liturgy. I don't agree that the liturgy of James dates back to the 1st century, but I'm not opposed to liturgy. I've got no reason to be opposed to liturgy. Not only that, even if liturgy can't be traced all the way back to the apostles. If a local church wants to do liturgy, and as a matter of fact, I know of a Protestant church that does it not very far away. Those people are friends of mine. The liturgy that they have is taken from, long traditions. They've decided upon which liturgy they wanted to do, and I think it's beautiful. They made a decision to do that on their own. They're free to do that. And the leadership of the church there is free to make decisions for the church. I don't object to bishops and church leaders making decisions in areas where the responsibility is theirs. I do object to patriarchs issuing decrees to churches that are 500 miles away. I don't think that's scriptural. I think the church is under the authority of Jesus Christ, and I think the local church is under obligation to be together, to seek the will of God, and together to find out what God is teaching to them, and to consult other churches where they get into trouble in order to have help. All of that is hard to do in the modern day, and there's a lot of difficult questions that arise in exactly how we practice in the 21st century after all the problems that have happened over the last 2,000 years. Well, this has been a long enough response. I hope that gives some idea of where I'm coming from, and I hope I don't sound too harsh. I actually appreciate everywhere that people have preserved apostolic teaching. I love the freedom of the Spirit. I love to see churches functioning in various ways. And so I guess I'll close with that. Thank you for your response. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. I'd love to facilitate discussions, and I hope that I'm not coming across too strong. Thank you.